Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Deep Thoughts. Today's topic is going to be about betrayal, because it's sort of an ennui feeling that we experience sometimes in life, and I say ennui because it just makes you feel awful. And some of you will have experienced betrayal, and some of you won't. Some of you will have experienced real, deep, massive betrayal, and some of you will experience just a sort of a light hint of it. But before we get into that, I've had a couple questions in the back channels from people about how the show's produced, how it's created. This is my winter mane as it gets really long. Next month, which is in a day, is the month I get my hair cut. I get my hair cut once a year. I would say 99 times out of 100, and that's quite frankly the truth. Probably 1 out of 103 episodes, which is about one season with the special reports. I make some notes. The rest of the time, it's just pulling it out of my ass while I'm going. Someone said that and the reason why this happened was that I mentioned this one on another episode, but a guy tried to show his relative, and his relative said, "Oh my God, that guy's reading from a teleprompter. It's why he has his sunglasses on." I thought that's pretty clever, because I don't know if anyone has worn sunglasses during any reporting at all, but that would be a great way to hide your eyeballs staring at something, right? Now, what I see is exactly what you see in the intro. When the camera's pointed this way and you see like a table with some chairs and like a shrubbery on a wall, that's exactly what I'm looking at. So if you just slow down the intro, you're seeing generally all the angles that I'm seeing. I haven't put a single piece of new furniture in this backyard since I started the show. So, I think most of you can sense that I'm winging it, because it's sort of abstract. Usually what happens with these shows is, I kind of have a topic like today. The other thing is that I've only been up like 20 minutes. So a ton of these shows are done right in the morning. I wake up and I have absolutely no clue what I'm going to record, but there's just this feeling, just this get out there and record, like you've got something, just go. We'll meet you when you sit down. And sometimes I'm setting up the hardware and I have nothing. I mean, that's probably been 30 or 40% of the episodes where I'm just setting it up going, what am I doing? If I can't come up with the topic, I'm setting all this hardware up for nothing. And so it just comes to you, you just relax and plug into the universe. The show is created with 4 objects, minus this chair. It's this JVC camera. It's a 1080p camera. I've got an M audio box that I got when I was working with Cool J. I've got an old 2011 17-inch laptop from Apple, which I love because it's 17 inches. This microphone, which kind of has the stand on it too, but this is a 58 mic that LL uses as well. We got these mics when we did a studio project together. And this old chair. And the chair is funny because it's made of like this plastic polyester. And if you go back to the very first episodes where you see me actually approach the chair, you can see the chair in pristine condition. And now the chair's, I guess, absorbed the sweat off my back or something, and it's starting to turn back into oil. So it's got some dark spots on it. Sort of breaks my heart. But anyway, I take the whole thing into Final Cut. I knock out all the cigar drags, the pauses in thought, the phone calls I get when I'm doing the show. Sometimes big fighter jets flying over, and then I knock it out into an audio file from Final Cut, and then I knock it out into a movie. I take the audio file and I process it through Amadeus Pro, beefing up the volumes, kind of balancing things out. One upload for the podcast, one upload for the video, create the thumbnail in Photoshop. There you go. So if you're into creating your own podcast, which I would suggest you do, because your voice is different than everyone else's, those are some of the pieces and parts. And just know you don't have to have everything lined up. This will be the only episode I really go through this, but let me go through what I'm thinking about before I come up with an episode, like right now. Betrayal. I know that I have been betrayed in so many different ways that I can definitely talk for an hour about it. But in my brain, what I'm seeing in my mind is a photograph of timeline. And what I will end up doing is just writing the first 5 minutes of the timeline in my brain. While I'm talking to you, I'm writing the next 5 minutes of the timeline, next and next and next. And the only challenge is if I bump into something that I need to follow up on, sometimes I forget to follow up on. I'll say, oh, well, we'll get to that in a second, and I never do. It's because I was unable to put the milestone ahead and remember it, because something else got really hot in what I'm saying. And so it just takes my mind off of it. But you'll find out that a lot of the episodes are sort of meandering slow towards the beginning third, and then I get my groove. I find out right away I hit a sweet spot in the timeline, about 30%, and automatically, instead of writing the next 5, it writes the whole next 70% of the hour. And then it's just me huffing and puffing to get there. I would encourage you to think in timelines. I would encourage you to draw everything in timelines. What are you going to do today? In your brain, just make a timeline. From now until the moment you lay your head down at night, these are the things I want to do. And that'll help your memory quite a bit. It'll help you interact with everything in life. All right. Let's begin. Betrayal. You know, there's some emotions I could bring up. Depending on what kind of person you are, you want to hear about them. And there's other emotions I'll bring up and you don't want to hear about it at all. The goal of this episode is to let you know you're not alone if you've been betrayed. The goal of this episode is to make sure that you have a path of recovery if you've been betrayed, so you can regain control of yourself. Because it's very important that you separate who you are from the people who betray you completely. We're going to talk about giving people chances and then having them betray those chances, and then perhaps you give them a second chance and they betray that, and how you recover from that. We're going to talk about human frailty. My whole life, I should say, probably from my early 20s up, I've told people, I said, look, humans will always let you down. Always. Because we're flawed. And of course, most of us think, well, some of us are way more flawed than others. Some of us have no problem sticking to our principles, and therefore our list of potential betrayals of to other people is either short to non-existent. And so we think, wow, how is it that people live lives and constantly betray others? So we'll get into the gradient of those individuals, because there are politicians out there. They do it every day. Every single day. There are bankers that do it every day. They all have a price, and the price isn't that high. And they are godless human beings. They don't believe in essential consciousness whatsoever. But I think it's extremely important to think about what is betrayal. Because I think that we're really convinced we know. And I think that once you stop for one split second and really think about, if you had to write down a definition of betrayal and prove it in a court of law, you immediately are faced with the gradient, the fact that there are potentially teeny tiny moments in time that are betrayal moments. And then there are big ones, huge ones. I have an episode that isn't watched too much because I think the title's a little confusing for people. But it's sort of a betrayal episode. And it's in season 1. It's called The Dagger of Goodwill. It's a very important episode. But it has to do with it's a poem I wrote a long time ago. And it has to do with people that use your goodwill to forge a weapon to stab you in the back. And I call it the dagger of goodwill. Someone sticks you with the dagger of your own goodwill. Because you were willing to trust them, they were able to forge the dagger from that trust. Every quality in you became a weapon, a dagger. Except you gave it to them because you gave them your trust. And they grab the handle and they shove it into your spine and they turn it. Right? But what's the big deal about betrayal? What's the big deal, right? Hey, some people betray you, man. What's the big deal? The big deal is that it can injure your mind. Obviously it can injure you in every conceivable manner, but let's just focus on the mental today. Betrayal can damage you in a way that is hard to reverse. I'll tell you a little story here. When I first came to California, I was involved with a church community. One of the church elders was a psychology professor at Pepperdine University. And he told a story once about his wife on a trip somewhere. The two kids in the back were bickering, and the boy, I guess, was poking the daughter with his hands. I don't know how old he was, but the mother turned around and slapped the boy in the face to make him stop. Boy, did he ever stop. But the father, very calmly and coolly, pulled the car over immediately on the side of the highway. And he got out, told his wife to get out of the car. And she walked up to him and he said, "Don't you ever, ever slap our children. Ever." And she was obviously very respectful of him, and she says, "Well, what's going on here?" And he said, "You have no idea the betrayal you just gave our son. You just scarred him in a way that it's going to take a few years for you to undo that slap, maybe a lifetime." Because he's a psychologist, he deals with all the moments of trauma that completely destroy people's lives. And he practiced on the side, actually. I've had one session with him, and it was amazing. And of course, obviously, she went in and apologized to him. But when he told me that story at the age of, 19 years old, it changed my life forever about how fragile we are and how we do build up these sort of silos of trust with individuals. And when we're slapped, it can be as devastating as he put forth. Now, I was slapped by my mom one time, and I think I completely deserved it because I said the F-bomb at the age of 9. Not at her. I was talking about, she was accusing me of doing something that I actually did. And I said, "I didn't do that fucking thing, blah, blah, blah." Smack! And it didn't hurt much. And I didn't really have any, in retrospect, I remember it very well, like it was yesterday or like 1 second ago. And I don't remember having any, animosity to my mother for doing it. I actually thought it was kind of like, wow, this is neat, which is weird. So I pushed a barrier. I thought that was like I was exploring a barrier of getting disciplined a little better. But betrayal between two people can create that permanent scar. But now think about it. Someone betrays you, and it hurts. It can hurt in every conceivable manner. Obviously, you have a problem at that point with the person that betrayed you. So that individual, to your best ability to define and identify them, has betrayed you, right? So every time you see them, every time they talk to you, especially anytime they make a commitment to you, you obviously no longer believe them as much. They're the boy they call wolf, sort of. Yeah, sure, you're going to be accountable to me when you haven't been accountable, right? But here's the rub. Whether or not you realize it or not, you cease to be as gullible as you were. And you start to apply that caution to every other human being that you meet. Maybe this person's going to betray me. And the weird thing is this. Let's say we have person A and person B, and person B is going to betray person A. Now, we know the basic dynamics of betrayal, as we just said, but let's take it one step further. Person B is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white guy, long hair, like mine. And A gets betrayed hardcore by B, right? And I will tell you, for the rest of the A person's life, anyone that shows up with blonde hair and blue-eyed, with especially long blonde hair, is going to be extra scrutinized because they match the pattern of a person that one time betrayed them badly. Now, you can obviously undo it, but I think that in all reality, there's a tiny kernel of suspicion forever in the A person that the Celtic warrior is not to be trusted. And that's where this gets really interesting. But now, how do we get betrayed in the first place? I mean, how does it happen? Well, obviously, the first thing that happens, and again, I'm going to talk about some low-fruit things, but I want you to keep listening because I'm going to take it hopefully a couple steps further than the basics, right? I think all my shows do this, but obviously you trust someone. And what are you trusting them to do? You're trusting them to make their word their bond, that they will do what they say to the very best of their abilities. Now, obviously, when someone can't fulfill it because of circumstances beyond their control, you let them off the hook. And that could be that they needed some external resource to show up, to be there, to be available, and it simply wasn't accessible, and so they were unable to help you the way they said they would. The other one might be that they're 5 foot tall, and they said they're going to help you move, but everything you own weighs as much as a fucking gun safe, and there's nothing they can do to help you because they can't lift it. It's not their lack of commitment, it's their lack of physical prowess to do what you need them to do. So you let them off the hook. And really, if you're smart, you'll take the thought that counts sort of principle and go, well, you know, it's awesome that you even said you would do it. I think that's cool. So the thing is, when if we flip back to the morality episode for a split second, think about this. Every time we endorse behavior in society, whether it be a 1-degree turn away from normality or a gigantic 90-degree turn away from morality and accountability, then we are preparing society to let us down as a whole because everyone's addicted to a lack of accountability. What if it became a trend that no one paid their bills? Then no one would get paid, we'd all lose our jobs, we'd all be broke, and we'd be in a weird barter society. It makes a difference. It makes a difference. I think I've said in a couple episodes that haven't aired yet that I've been rewatching all the MASH episodes from 1971 up. And there's a very interesting thing that correlates with sort of what I'm saying. We all know that the 1970s was the launch of sort of the feminist movement to get the women in the workplace, the diabolical plan of the Rockefellers to make every single income household a double income household as a requirement, thus shoving the kids into the Prussian educational system as early as possible, meaning the children never bond with their parents. The parents are all strung out on, possessions and me, thus fueling divorce rates. And, America in 1970, you died together, and by 1980, you divorced. Over 50% of America was just divorced. And that's how quickly television and media reprogrammed the minds of humanity to have very little accountability in this world. And so I'm watching MASH, and MASH is, for those of you who didn't watch it as a kid, you're too young. It's actually a brilliant comedy. It's one of the longest running comedies in American history. And we've got a few that have now blown it away in the last 40 years, but it was one of the first shows to go forever. But it's about a medical unit on the front lines of the war in Korea in the early 50s, about 1951. And a MASH unit is a medical unit where they basically fix everyone. It's a really fast-paced comedy. If you are familiar with the Marx Brothers, most of the comedy is written like Groucho Marx one-liners, especially for Alan Alda's character. But here's what's interesting. For the first time, I was able to see a brilliant comedy that was written on top of a substrate of immoral behavior. And the immoral behavior is that every single person in this MASH unit who is of any level of rank is married and cheating. Now, Alan Alda's character is not married as far as I know, and there's a nurse, Hot Lips, that she isn't married either, but she's cheating with another guy. The Alan Alda character is getting every nurse who's married to cheat on their husbands. The whole thing is a gigantic cheating game. If you think about sort of a mind programming formula, you're laughing constantly. This show is still funny to this day. Some of the comedy is brilliant. Some of it's silly, but some of it's brilliant. So you're laughing, and then there's an immoral behavior, and you're laughing, and you're laughing at the immoral behavior. And so it's fun to be immoral. It's fun to betray your spouse. Spouses with kids. The spouses are all at home, and they're, of course, stupid. And they're stupid women with stupid kids, and da-da-da. It's very interesting. So before we dive super deep into betrayal, we got to figure out how we are being convinced to betray. Now, love betrayal is probably the one that we remember the most, to be honest. Love betrayal is very interesting because love is not a mathematical constant in the universe. It's not some algorithm that if you just follow the numbers, you get love. So love betrayal tends to get at your being and make you question whether or not you are sufficiently male or female to get whatever sex you're looking for. So when someone betrays you romantically, it injures your self-perception. Are you not man enough? Are you not woman enough? And that's a problem because it damages you deeply. And of course, by the end of this episode, I'm going to try to convince you not to let that affect you. But now let's talk about a lesser form, which could be very frustrating and very devastating to your being, which is like a business betrayal. And I'm only going to do this analogy because, well, I believe that some of you have probably been screwed over in a business deal. I certainly have. But there's a way to walk away from a business deal betrayal and live a normal life after that. Now, I could go through several examples of having been screwed in business deals, some that I should have seen coming and some that there's nothing I could have done but walk right into it. But in the end, what ends up happening is that the whole experience is compartmentalized very, very quickly if you're smart. If someone betrays you in a business sense, then there's a couple things you need to do. You need to sever your relationship at all costs. You need to pretty much never walk in the other person's circle if you can for the rest of your days, to whatever cost it takes, whether or not that makes you have to move out your shit in the middle of the night. I guess I'll mention a couple. I bumped into a guy here in Huntington Beach who had a little tiny game company. He was a guy that ate pizza at my buddy's place across the street. And they hooked me up because I was sort of in the middle, floating. I just come back down to Southern California from the Bay Area. And he was sort of like a mom and pop shop, just had little tiny gigs here and there. Didn't do any work himself. He had guys and girls that did all the work for him. That's fine. But I sort of said, let's go for the bigger brand of macaroni because I'm not interested in this mom and pop bullshit. I just came out of Electronic Arts, running a gigantic department, and I'm not interested in this petty shit. And so I worked out a deal with a major video game company worth several $100,000, and I closed it. I bid it, I closed it, I built a team. But the guy that was running this company had lied on several different levels. He said that he had a pre-existing clump of code that could do a large part of what we had bid on. So we said, okay, out of 100% of the code that needs to be created, he's claiming he's got a 50 to 40% chunk of it already written. And out of the remaining 100% that needed to be completed, that he was going to do a fourth of it. So we no sooner signed this deal, I walk around the corner to his office and I said, hey, could you send me that code? This is my fault, not doing my due diligence and trusting this asshole. I said, could you send me that code that you keep talking about? I shit you not, he laughed in my face and said, there's no code. We'll build it from scratch. I said, well, then you just took on a hell of a lot more code because we're sure as hell not building it. Our plates are full. And then the guy proceeded not to do a single goddamn thing. He was this tone-deaf douchebag sitting in his office singing songs to himself. His other employees, one went off on a bed rest during her pregnancy, and the other guy was programming on something else. Then, about 2 days later, he takes me to lunch, and he says that he's $190,000 in debt with the IRS, and then he's going to use most of the money of this project to pay off his debt with the IRS. There was one question he asked me at the very beginning of me doing this deal. He said, do you mind if we put this contract through my company instead of your company? Because I've been at this address for a long time, think it might help closing the deal. My company had been around for several years, but I did just move it. It wouldn't have mattered, but I made the mistake and agreed, being a nice guy. So about 2 weeks goes by, and I'm noticing that we're doing all the work, and he's doing jack shit. In fact, he's running around, traveling around the country, doing family, horse shit. And he leaves on one of his little trips. He said his wife's uncle passed, but I don't know. So I take all the computer hardware that I had moved into his office, and moved it back to my place. Then within about 72 hours, we had a meeting with the big video game company because it's our close friend from EA who moved there. And we told her, this guy's a complete scam artist. He's way in debt with the IRS. He lied about having this code. He's not doing any work on the project. We would like to complete it outside of this deal, and we want you to cut us the checks instead of cutting him the checks. And they said, sounds good. Sounds good. Fuck that guy. Of course, he comes home, goes back to his office, and I'm gone, baby. And then he made one fatal miscalculation. I'm on the phone with the CTO of this fucking major video game company, all right? And this douchebag comes to my house, this house I'm at right now, and he starts pounding on my door with his fist. Now, this guy is a blubbering fucking nerd knocking on a fucking gunslinging cowboy's house, thinking he's going to read me the riot act. Oh, man. I opened that door. At first, I had to say, the guy on the phone, the CTO, goes, "What's that noise?" I said, "That's the guy we signed the contract with that we told you was a total criminal. He's pounding on my door and won't stop." I said, "You mind if I call you back?" "Sure." Wow, what an asshole, the CTO says. So in one fell swoop, the guy pounds on my door and certifies to the CTO of this major fucking label. If I even said the company's name, you guys would go, "Oh, shit." And so I hang up and I open the door. And I don't know, his mommy obviously built up his ego way higher than it ever really amounted to. And I was about to physically fucking beat this guy's face in. I was so fucking pissed off and so just ready to kick this motherfucker's ass. But he saw my face and he backed up. He took 2 steps back, and I just looked at him and I said, "You're done." I said, "You're a fucking scumbag." I said, "You lied about fucking everything." And I said, "The client knows that you're a fucking lying scumbag. Get the fuck off my property. Don't ever fucking contact me again. If you see me, walk the other way." Because I fucking told him, I said, "If there's any legal way for me to beat your fucking ass to the edge of your life, it's going to happen." I was pissed because this shit was all new and all fresh, right? I finally saw him about a year ago at a Whole Foods. He is completely out of the video game business and does like business apps for phones. He still looks like a douchebag, but he's just frumpy. He handles his whole external body like he handles his business, right? But he's managed to squeak by. His wife is a descendant of an extremely popular multi-Academy Award-winning musician, of which you've heard all of his music and space movies with men that breathe and you can hear their breath under their mechanical voice. So you better believe that's where he gets his survival money, to be a douche. But now here's the thing. I'm giving you this one example so that you can hear a full cycle of how I learned to handle this in a very professional manner. And by the way, we sued this asshole and got all of our money. He barely made any money from the whole deal. It's fantastic. And I guarantee you, the video game business has a blacklist. And he was at the fucking top at the end of this deal. So I was very angry, and I wanted to continue suing him into the middle of next week. I wanted to continue completely fucking destroying this guy. Now, he had already set everything in motion, so it was going to happen organically anyway. We had 3 top executives. One of went off to become a very high-up person at Marvel. The other one went back to EA, and the other one became the CTO of one of the biggest retailers on planet Earth. And so they take it with them, their opinion of him. And the funny thing is that one of the guys, who's a very close friend of mine, wasn't quite sure we were telling the truth at first. And the guy completely proved to him that that's who he was. But anyway, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a very, very strong-minded individual, takes shit from no one. And I was just telling him, I said, "Man, I'd just love to do this, this, and this. legally just to fucking destroy the guy. And my buddy just said to me, he goes, look, here's what you got to do. He says, you don't want that negative energy around you. You got to forget this guy. And it was the last thing I wanted to hear, and it was the last thing I was prepared to hear. But I'm going to tell you right now, if you have a big, giant piece of betrayal, if you just felt what I felt, and you're like, yeah, fuck this guy, let's destroy him. If you have that feeling, the best thing you can do is walk away. And so this was the event that occurred just before we started my video game company with one of the guys on the team, which is one of my former employees from EA. He and I formed a C Corp about, 2 months after we finished that gig. And we made a pact with each other. Because he and I are really positive, super accountable guys to each other. And we said, let's not mention this guy's name. Let's not talk about having ever worked on that project. Let's just compartmentalize it out of our history and move on. And he said, yep, because I'm a real positive guy too, and I don't want to have anything to do with that. And so that's exactly what we did. And you know what happened? We went from a measly couple $100,000. I think the gig was worth $170,000 between 4 people. I mean, it would have been amazing, right? We got most of it. But we couldn't collect a giant portion of the last piece because he screwed up and didn't deliver the last piece. But anyway, that was his loss. We went off and made a video game company that earned $6 million. We were the #1 company on planet Earth that did what we did. We closed every single deal we ever pitched for 10 years. And I sort of think that that's the reward that we got for not getting caught up in the drama of our past. So I want you to think about that when you think about the cycle of betrayal. Now, a lot of you have already thought this through. You've already come through with this, and you have a much better balance to how to handle this. So I salute your maturity, and I bow down to you. What's funny is, just to digress on subject for 1 second, one thing you'll notice when you start to get older is that it won't matter how old a human being is. When you have to evaluate their level of maturity, I have friends of mine that are 3 decades older than me, and I can tell that they've had very sheltered, wonderful lives. And it's beautiful and it's weird all at the same time. You know, if I go back to my hometown, I look at a bunch of wonderful, pure-hearted people that will do anything for you, have never betrayed a soul. And then when we talk about life, they've barely experienced it. But now they've plowed, 1 million square miles of land in their lifetime. They've done whatever that they do, and they've done amazingly, and they know everyone, but they're immature. In a beautiful way. They're pure. They have a childlike heart and soul and mind. And it's a beautiful thing. Now, when I moved to California as a kid, I sort of knew subliminally that I was going to have to mature very quickly to protect myself. My parents, who had never really lived in the big city before in any engagement way, warned me because they knew. They knew that I could run into people that would take advantage of me. And so what that gave me was the theme of my life to be cautious. And I got played pretty hard in small ways when I first moved here. But it was actually really good, harmless ways that I got played. I'll tell you another one that was just a lesson that a guy taught me that I work for. And I had this weird relationship with this guy because we started off good friends, and then we ended up sort of enemies, and it was sort of weird. He was having a hard time with his life for some reason. I don't know why. But I needed to borrow some money. I can't remember. I think it was about $500 or something. I think. That seems like a lot, but I was probably about 19, 20 years old. I was super successful at this tax company, the TurboTax people. I was like an engineer, full engineer of one of the platforms, probably 19. And he wasn't quite my boss, I don't think, at the time. No, he wasn't my boss at the time, but he was just a close friend. I was in a startup with him, with his brother, and I'd mentioned that I needed some money. He says, I'll loan you the money, no big deal. Just got to sign a promissory note to pay me back. And I can't thank this guy enough for what he did to me. I'm sitting there in front of my development platform, sunny day. He walks in his little Hawaiian shirt. He's kind of a tree trunky kind of guy. And he puts the promissory note down. He tells me, he goes, this is just a promissory note that you'll pay me back within 30 days or whatever. I said, okay, fine. I sign it. And he says, do you realize you didn't read it? And I said, why? What's it say? And he points at the sentence and it says, I agree to pay it back 3 times the amount. So it'd be like $1,500, right? And he takes a few steps back. Now this guy's an actor on the side. He's a real character. He takes 3 steps back, and I stand up, and I'm immediately like gonna attack the guy physically. Like this is just my personality. And he sees this, and he knows that he's got to come up with the other half of the gag, right? And he looks at me and he goes, "Read what you sign." And he already had the other one printed out. That was a 1x to 1x, no interest rate at all. And he puts the other one down and he goes, now, I'm tearing this one up, you sign this one. What he did was something that a father probably couldn't do for me, which is I would never borrow money and sign a contract with my dad. So this guy was able to do something that my parents couldn't do, and I loved him for it. He went from like, I'm going to kill you, to like, I love you. This is fantastic. You taught me a very valuable lesson. And so just a cool little story about how that can work out for your benefit, right? But let's go back to the question of how does the betrayal affect you, right? It affects you because where life is black and white in a business sense, like I told you in those examples, I just cut the guy out of my life and I moved on with my life. With emotional betrayal, let's take a relationship. I've definitely experienced, cheating from them to me. And what's interesting is that you typically don't really look at it in a high enough perspective, high enough altitude at the problem to really understand it before you start surmising what took place. When you're a young kid, though, and you're dating around, and then the other person, you find out someone's with someone else, and what ends up happening is that we are so taught that other human beings can be our mental property, that if they stray from your sanctity, which is only a concept in your mind, that somehow they've injured you, they've stabbed you in the heart with a dagger. You will never, ever in your life, ever own another human being. Not with a marriage certificate, not with a birth certificate of your children. You will never own another human being for as long as the universe exists. Think about God for a second. If you're a faithful person, whether or not you consider that to be a religious construct or a unified universe person, God doesn't behave like he owns us, does he? He doesn't. Where is he? If he owns us, wouldn't we be doing his bidding? I don't feel like that's happening in my life. Do you? I feel like I have free reign to completely fuck it up to my absolute delight. I can become Adolf Hitler. I can become Mother Teresa. So how does that affect your perspective of all human beings on planet Earth? Well, let me suggest something. If your child chooses to be with you and talk to you, then that's a good day. But they're going to have their own life. You can't take it personal if they're more into their life, if they're enjoying owning their life. Hey man, you did your job. They're totally happy. They don't think any bad thoughts about you. They're just busy. Every day you wake up and your spouse or your partner agrees to be with you, that's a good day. They chose to be with you. With that added extra perspective, I think you'll find that the level of betrayal that you have experienced probably wasn't as bad as you thought. But let's rewind. I was a very young man when I experienced my first level of what I thought was betrayal. I was in a bit of a denial process, and I've told the story a little bit, but I'll tell it from the betrayal perspective. I was dating a girl for throughout high school, Wonderful girl. But I was being a complete jealous jerk. It was my first big-time relationship, and I just didn't know how to handle it. I wasn't getting any advice from parents because how do they know? They wouldn't know how messed up you are because you don't share that kind of stuff with them. So they don't have any information to help you or give you a warning. But I was pulling her away from all of her friends. Anytime she looked at a guy, I just utterly punished her for it verbally. It was just, I was acidically horrible person in a relationship. I probably 90% great guy, 10% unlivable. But she tolerated it because it was her first relationship too. Well, in the end, I started doing a kind of a cold shoulder ignore treatment for a 24-hour period, which resulted in us breaking up. So we broke up. She's not going to do whatever she wants. That's the way it works, right? Well, she ended up partnering up with a former best friend of mine. Great guy to this day. But he and I had kind of not, they come and go. I had a different buddy I was hanging out with. But he and I were best friends at one point, and I still liked him. And they had hooked up as it was. And I went and translated that into, oh my God, we've only been apart from each other 2 days, and you're already with this other guy. Now, you could impose bros before hoes and all that kind of stuff, saying that dude shouldn't have done anything because he was my buddy. He should have talked to me about her first. I don't really subscribe to that. If those two could have remained happy for the rest of their lives, that's what should have happened. And they tried, and it didn't work out. But I went around just devastated that, one, we broke up, and two, that she had already moved on so quickly. And in my mind had done things so quickly that I couldn't possibly let her back in, because that was betrayal. It was too soon to be dating somebody else. And the other thing is I had them both for like the first 3 hours of school. So it was like the three of us sat together for the first 3 hours of school. So I had to come to school and watch them in front of me, passing notes and stuff. It was a good lesson for me. It really shored up my flippedness towards being a jerk-off. And I learned my lesson super fast. I ended up blaming myself very quickly. I was able to somehow pull out and go, God, I was a total dick. Of course she left. And to this day, nowadays, I think about it, I think, wow, she gave me a lot more months than she should have. She should have dumped me within 6 months. Instead, I got a year and a half. I got a year and a half of redos and tries. But every woman that's ever been with me since her has benefited from that realization. But the betrayal went deeper than that, because it was an emotional, romantic betrayal in my mind. Only in my mind, right? But you start to wonder as a man, and it's definitely hard. I think it's more hardcore for women, just observing their reactions to this kind of stuff. But you start to think, you're telling me that I'm not that good. That's sort of the feeling we have, right? You're telling me I'm not that much of a man, that this guy's more of a man than I am. That's what you think in your head. Now, ultimately, it's only one person's opinion, right? There are a shit ton of fish in the sea, right? And you barely meet any of them. But now, there's a couple things to this. I'm going to say this before I forget. What is the trend in life when, I hear this almost unanimously from women and almost unanimously not from men. And maybe we're more understanding. Maybe we're just pigs. But the amount of times that I've heard, women over 30 talk about how they would react if they found out their husband was cheating on them. It is unequivocally always the same, which is, I throw him on his fucking ass, I throw all of his stuff out in the front yard, I divorce him, I take his money, I take his kids, da-da-da-da-da. Now, before I go any further, I need to stress, I am by no means trying to authorize, sanction cheating, all right? I think that there are far better techniques of communicating with your spouse that things are going wrong, that you're having temptations, that ultimately you should separate, you should tell your partner that you're going to start dating other people. There's a bunch of other gentler ways to sleep with other people if that's what you need to do, besides just arbitrarily doing it behind your lover's back, regardless if they've done it to you. But let's go back to that idea that we don't own anyone, that everyone's flawed, and put those two things together, there are some people that are going to be slimy bastards, like that guy I did that business deal with. They're going to be slimy their whole life. They make it a practice to step on people's heads to get ahead. That's how they run their lives. You make a choice whether or not you want to be that kind of person or not be that kind of person, right? The problem I have with the knee-jerk reaction towards infidelity is that there's a lot of damage that goes on. When I've seen my buddies experience this, and I honestly can't say I have a lot of friends that have ever cheated on their wives or anything like that. I don't have those kind of friends. But there'll be a buddy of mine that talks about their friend or our mutual acquaintance or whatever. And I've heard of this. I've definitely heard it pretty close, a couple degrees away. And you hear about the devastation to the children, especially. Just as a fine point before we move on to the generic subject of betrayal, I would say that once you agree to spawn another being, a child, life isn't about you until they're 18 years old and off on their own. You sort of agreed to be in a contract to make a child. Now, for some of you, you never get married, and there's a balance between the two of you, and you can live your life. It's fine. The kid never has any expectations that their parents are going to be together. Hey, that's probably better than creating a household of torment and yelling and screaming and all those things, right? But if you start the game off together, in my personal opinion, you're sort of bound together. And if there's some sort of infidelity that comes about, you got to try to solve it. Try to figure out an agreement between the two of you. Got to make sure your kid doesn't see any of this crap. I've got friends of mine that were utterly and completely traumatized when they figured out that their parents were cheating. And it's really fascinating. I have a close friend of mine that I've known this person for, 30 years. And the story was always that the father was the cheater. The whole time I knew this person. Oh, my dad was a cheater, And I knew the guy, and I thought, he doesn't seem like that kind of guy. In fact, he seems like a very enlightened, very sentient, super sweet, super empathetic guy. I can't even imagine this guy cheating. And it wasn't until recently that this person remembered a memory that was actually the mother that cheated first. And that the father came home one night, and the mother was dancing with a random guy. I mean, there's probably small towns, they probably knew who this person was. But she was the one that got drunk and brought home a dude and was essentially breaking the marriage covenant. And the guy was standing at the door, I guess, through a screen door, and watching his wife dance with the random guy. And instead of being confrontational, because he's not that kind of guy, he's not a rock'em sock'em kind of dude, he just turned around and left. And within a week or a month or so, he went to a person that he'd had his eyes on, this whatever circle of life, he knew her, and they started dating. But the chronology was his wife cheated first, and he decided, because it was the 70s, and they don't have a lot of conversations like this in the 70s, you don't have any equipment to deal with it, so you just run away. And that's what he did. But he married that woman and stayed married to her for, I think, the better part of 35, 40 years. So he stayed committed. And the mom went through all kinds of boyfriends and eventually got married. And she's a wonderful lady. But what catalyzes the concept of betrayal to us? Meaning, what makes it so fucking bad sometimes, right? What makes it horrible? I'm going to tell you that it's our expectations of other human beings. Our expectation that we actually own another human being. And I know some of you might be thinking, well, I stood at an altar with my spouse and we read vows to each other. And those vows were commitments tantamount to ownership, mutual ownership of each other. Till death do us part is a pretty powerful term, right? A phrase. I understand why that gives one the feeling of complete ownership and commitment. And that's really what it is, right? You're making a committed contract with another human being. But now let's look at that for a split second. A lot of people get married between the ages of, when I was a kid, they got married between the ages of 18 and 25. Probably everyone was married before the age of 23 in the 60s. Now it's pretty much anywhere from 25 to 35 you get married, right? If you're 25 years old listening to this show, you're going to have a thought, or less, you're going to have this thought that you know exactly who you're going to be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. The truth of the matter is, a fraction of you have that correct. Some of the people will remain the same because they're stubborn bastards, they hate change, and they're going to live in the past their whole life. Some people are going to know who they are in the future because they simply have a massive grasp on reality. And then there's the rest. The overwhelming majority of the rest, which I think comfortably, conservatively speaking, would be about 98% of the rest of us. I have been very privileged to have a massive command over my life for my whole life. I mean my whole life. I've run my own show since I was a very, very young kid. I got the privilege of running my own life while living with my parents because my parents simply said, wow, he did it. Oh, he did it again. He did it. He said he's going to do this, and he did it. And he's sort of on autopilot. This is amazing. We can go off and have our lives, and we live with our kid who's sort of on his own little business journeys, right? But I will tell you, even with being able to accomplish virtually every goal I've ever set out to accomplish, there's a couple in Hollywood I'm still working on, I am not remotely the person I was at 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. I've only had this show on the air for a little over 2 years, right? A little over a year, excuse me. About a year and a half at this point. I'm already a completely different person. I feel so much more comfortable in my skin. And if you had asked me a year and a half ago, do you feel comfortable in your skin? I'd say, hell yeah, I feel comfortable in my skin. Unbelievable. But by making these shows and talking with you guys through the comments, it's been phenomenal. You know, I don't always get a chance to reply, but I read them all. If I give you a thumbs up, I've read your comment. I've really read it, and I've enjoyed it. The reason why I mention this is that when you make an agreement to be with another human being for the rest of your life, it depends on how early you make that agreement as to what that means 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and 30 years from now. If you get married in your mid-20s, you're in for a massive ride. You're going to be riding the Bronco at the bar, drunk, on high. That's what you're prepared to do. Now, there's some beautiful synergy when you're with another human being every single day of your life that you tend to meld your paths together. You tend to think alike. You can finish each other's sentences sometimes. But oftentimes, I don't know what the percentage is, maybe not 50%, I don't know. You have a slightly different thought process about where you're going. And over days and weeks, that makes you a completely different human being than the one that stood at the altar and gave the vows. And when you realize that, you have a choice. You can either communicate with your spouse about these differences, talk about who you were when you made the vows, talk about who you are today. And we're not talking about infidelity or betrayal at this point. We're just talking about how you grow apart. I can tell you experience I had. I got engaged once to a girl, and I was very young, in my early 20s. And here I was, a very academic person, very technical, top of my game. And this woman was just super sweet, very street smart. Not terribly academically smart, but didn't matter. I don't need a woman to be a scientist, a lover. And I noticed that over the course of, once we got together and lived together, there was a huge maturity difference. And then, having known this person for 20 years after that, we did not get married, but knowing her 20 years after that, she pretty much stayed the same as the day I asked her to marry me. Education never ever became a part of her life. Books were like kryptonite. And she is, I believe, largely unemployable at this stage in her life because of that lack of commitment to reality and to life. Good person. But that's just where things become different. So here's the thing. Why do I do a digression on that? The reason is that if you have been betrayed, or you feel like you are about to betray the sanctity of a relationship, or especially a marriage, I'm going to tell you that the best thing you can do is to sort of have an emergency meeting with the other person. And, well, again, if you're about to, let's just separate this. I got two solutions for this. If you're about to betray, you're feeling tempted, you're not getting what you think you need, and you need to get it from someone else, right? You need to start communicating fast. Figure out what you really have, because you have a bunch of concepts in your mind that may or may not be true. If you hit a stone wall with the other person and they don't want to talk about anything, do me a favor, man. Start discussing an exit. Be very nice about it, but say, look, this isn't working out. And if you're married, I understand that's fucking nearly impossible to make a good conversation out of that. If you still love the other person, that you're just frustrated that you're not alike anymore, tell them that you love them. Tell them that you really want to make the thing work. But please try to put the cart behind the horse and try to get your chronology of like, well, maybe we should separate for a little while, and I can't guarantee I'm going to be faithful to the vow of, marital copulation commitment, right? I guarantee you it will reduce your level of pain, no matter how painful that experience is, what you're about to experience. If you do it before you separate of any kind, you will pay a 10x price. The pain will be dramatically more. The devastation will be more. You will be accused of being one of those people that betray people at the ultimate physical, romantic level. But if you can at least put some things down in paper and let your friends know what's going on, your closest friends, maybe your closest family members, look, it isn't working out. I've really tried to communicate. It's not working. We're separating. This is probably the end if these things can't be fixed. Then if you end up with someone else on your arm at another party or something, family gathering, at least everyone will go, well, he said that's what's going to happen. She said that's what's going to happen. But if you've been betrayed in these areas, you want to reduce the amount of damage that it can perceivably do to your insides, right? You have to be the limiter of how much someone else can own the opinion of who you are. Because that's what we allow to happen in a betrayal circumstance. We say, wow, I must not be man enough for this chick. I'm not feminine enough for this guy. Who cares what they think, to be honest, right? I mean, you will care. That's the thing, is you'll have a couple feelings that are absolutely categorically untrue. And it's hard to deal with the fact that these things aren't true. But listen to me. They're true. And it goes something like this. It's true that they're not true. Let's put it that way. They're untrue. You will think that the partner you have found at whatever young age, and let's just say you've been with the person for 20 years, every year that goes by makes this illusion seem more real, but it's not. You will say that you can never find someone like this in your life, that this person is your soulmate, the one and only. And that's the way it's going to feel. That's what's going to make you cry. That's what's going to make you fear the concept of isolation, of being lonely, of being by yourself, because you think, I'll never be able to find another person like this. It's totally untrue. You can. And obviously you didn't find the person that you thought you found. It's all been in your head the whole time. And I know that might seem devastating. Don't tell me that's not true. But think about today. I mean, I just came to my mind just now, the idea that we have social media. You don't really need Match.com and eHarmony.com. You just need Facebook, your closest friends. Start hanging out with your friends. You'll bump into other people that might be better fits for you, right? If everyone's happy in the end, then you can let bygones be bygones. No harm, no foul, right? They're happy, you're happy. It didn't work out. So what? If you both can make it work out with somebody else, you're good. I got a buddy of mine who had a couple kids, Got a beautiful wife. I mean, beautiful wife. And he was unfaithful to her. He had no good excuse for being unfaithful to her, to be honest. And they divorced. I think it was her that finally divorced. But I knew his children, and I was talking to one of his kids who was in his late 20s at the time. I talked to him, and he said, my mom is still utterly devastated about their divorce. And she sits at home and smokes weed, and she doesn't have to work because of their residual income. I guess she got half his money, and it was enough that she didn't have to work. But he said she's devastated at home. And we're we're out camping out in the wilderness, so it was a really, introspective moment for all of us, or both of us, he and I. And it didn't really hit me at the time, but I was feeling it subconsciously, and I want us to learn from this moment because I have seen photographs of her recently. Within that, it's probably like 5 years ago this happened. And she's a beautiful woman. To this day, she's beautiful. She's probably in her mid-50s, at least. Maybe late 50s. But she's still beautiful. But what happened there? I assume they divorced about 15 years ago or so, somewhere in there. Instead of taking advantage of the fact that she was absolutely beautiful and a wonderful person, she sulked in the betrayal. She ate up 15 great years of her youth to find another man. And to this day, she is unmarried and still smoking her weed and sitting in her house. And her sons are sort of devastated to go visit her because she's so unhappy. And let me ask you, do you want to be that person? Do you want to fall victim to betrayal that you didn't control in the first place? Betrayal is something that happens to you, regardless of your perspective of owning another human being, of believing that there's only one person for you in the whole world and you found them, believing that the business deal that you were in somehow sours your entire future, which I assure you it doesn't. Do you really want to be that person? Do you want to be a victim even further than you've been a victim before, right? The first betrayal happens to you, and the second layer of betrayal, you can accidentally allow yourself to do to yourself. The obvious answer is no. You got to pick yourself back up. Now, I mentioned a few episodes ago that I have a relative that I cut out of my life. And that's another way of handling it. Like I handled the business guy, I cut him completely out of my life. And I only bumped into him because I was buying some food at the deli at Whole Foods, and there he was. And, at that point, I didn't have any negative feelings towards him. My life has been utterly fantastic because of his betrayal. I created this other business, and that just one thing led to another, right? So sometimes those things are the best things that can ever happen to you. But I have heard the family one a lot in my lifetime. They say, what is blood's thicker than water, right? I've always heard that applied to the idea that family is family. You don't betray family. And people get all hung up on that concept. I think the people that are hung up on that concept are doing themselves a great injustice. Why is it that it's because someone shares blood with you that somehow they have to perform better than everyone else in the world that you bump into? It makes no sense, people. That's a fairy tale. Just because you share blood. If anything, it's probably going to make you butt heads even more because you're too much alike. You want the same things, perhaps, and there's only perhaps one thing on the patio, and there's two of you that want it because you were raised exactly the same way. Both of you want the same thing, but both of you can't have it. And sometimes things can't be cut down the middle, and you get half and you get half, right? It's an ice cream maker. It's not going to work if you cut it in half, right? One of you gets it, one of you doesn't. Maybe either you can work out a way that someone compensates you in a different way by having the whole thing. But sometimes you're just going to have to take a lump on the head, right? Now, in a perfect world, we could keep the sanctity of the coat of arms of your family at a higher priority than all other vows you could take to any other human being, and those family vows would pay off, right? But we have to, I made an episode, about being offended. And this sort of dovetails with that. my grandfather had two brothers. And so there's three brothers in this family, and they owned a shit ton of land that had a shit ton of oil on it and farmland and all kinds of stuff. But he was the youngest of three. And their family was very traditional German family. And it was essentially you hand it down to the first, and then the first can hand it to the second. And then if you're the third, you're kind of tough shit. And that's what happened to my grandfather. He was the guy that was forced to do all the hard labor on the land, including leasing the fields and then checking out all the oil wells, which I think he enjoyed. But in the end, he never told me personally, but the family told me that he sort of felt betrayed by his brothers because they ended up taking all the money. But that's the way the father had set it all up. And the sons never adjusted their moral compass to include him like they should have. Now my grandfather was never a lazy man, and he was never needing for money. I mean, he went off and created a car dealership. It was down there forever. And he just set himself up great. The brother got to retire and enjoy, I would say, the last 20 years of his life without having to work. He chose to check out oil wells and stuff like that. And then he had a heart attack and nearly died. My grandfather had a heart attack while checking out his wells. And the funny thing is that every time I go out with him every once in a while as a kid and my teens, and my grandfather would put this ugly-ass prison jumpsuit on. Fucking orange jumpsuit, right? The kind you crawl into like pajamas and you zip up your chest, right? And he was sort of had a tiny pot belly on him by the time he was in his 60s. But now here's the ironic, hilarious thing that happened. He's at a well that's just off the side of the highway, probably a tenth of a mile, and he has this heart attack. Doesn't kill him, but he lies down because he just can't stand up. It's hitting him hard enough, and he just sits there and lies down. He's not a real tall guy, but he has this little belly, not like a pot belly, but just a little swell there, and some dude's driving by in his pickup truck, and he's just looking around because you do, there's nothing else to do, and he notices there's this guy in an orange jumpsuit on his back with his little belly. So he's easy to see. It's broad daylight. And the guy's like, that looks weird. Maybe he's taking a rest on his back next to an oil well. And so he drives down there and finds out that he needs medical assistance. And he saves my grandfather's life. My grandfather lived 10 to 15 years after. I don't even know when he had his heart attack. But that saved his life. That ugly-ass orange jumpsuit. I think that's utterly hilarious, right? I just remember that just now. Completely forgot about it. But now my grandfather, he was a very stoic guy. He and I would watch Johnny Carson and the Jay Leno show at night. And so he had a really good, he was just hilarious. He had lots of quips, and he had like all these cool things he would do. He sung in the barbershop quartet perfectly. He was a writer. I mean, he was really a massively talented guy. But there was definitely this sort of weird veneer on his character that he was not totally thrilled with life. And every once in a while I'd ask my mom, I'd say, hey, what's up with Grandpa? Why is he so kind of, grumpy all the time? Or grumpy, sort of it wasn't really bipolar, but it was sort of, he's either having a good day or he's having a bad day. He would never shit on you. Like, he would never make you have a bad day, ever. But we loved the guy, and we just wanted him to be smiling all the time, right? And then she told me about this story of the brothers, and I knew one of the brothers. I didn't know the other one. And I think one of them moved south or something like that, so I never met him. But it was the perception in his brain that sort of made him feel betrayed. And it ate away his life. And so I would hope that for all of you, that if you're in a situation where a perception is equaling betrayal, that you will do what you can to sever the link with that feeling. And that can mean cutting someone out of your life, right? The dude I cut out of my life in my own family, I really forgot to mention that it was based on a series of betrayals for a really long time, like 15 years, 20 years. And he would just do anything in his power because he was ultimately super jealous of his laziness and my productivity, that he didn't want, he would try to always keep me down, but he would actively go out and try to do things and grief things. If I made a website, he would go up and try to literally take a shit on it. And he did a couple times. And I caught him a couple times by tracing his IP address right to his fucking house. And I said, dude, you're this dick that's taking a shit on my website. Never had the courage to reply. Just wants to go a couple of years not talking, and then he comes back as if nothing happened because he's a child inside. And finally I just got tired of the loop. You know? So you might have to sever some relationships, either friendship or family. But you got to go live your life, man. You do. You got to make sure that this betrayal, if you experience it, doesn't infect who you are as a human being, doesn't, reduce your level of happiness. Now, you may have, fairy tales in your mind, and we all do. And the fairy tales might go something like this. In a romantic relationship, you might say, well, I have a fairy tale that I'll find the perfect spouse and be happy. Now, I've talked to the most perfect couples on planet Earth, and they all struggle, man. They say it's a job. We just make it look easy. You may have a fairy tale of having a bunch of loving children that want to be involved with you your whole life. And they want to do nothing of the sort. They want to get out on their own. Well, you need to perceive that as your genetics are so strong and so amazing that your kids want to dominate the world with their life path. Even if they get everything wrong and become drug users and weirdos. In their mind, they're owning the universe. They're just doing a poor job of it based on most of our perspectives, right? You may have a lot of brothers and sisters, and your dream is to have them approve of you and include you in family things. And they don't. All right. Why don't you sever the ties for now? Go off and make yourself the most interesting human being that could ever walk this planet. Be the most kind, loving, creative, empathetic, wonderful human being that no one can say a thing about besides that person's amazing. You might find yourself invited back in the circle. You may not. But in the end, what you'll find after years of processing this is that perhaps they're not worthy of you. That could happen, right? It's a change in perspective as to whether or not you've been betrayed, whether or not you're a victim, or whether or not you're just living life. And shit happens. I developed a saying in my early 20s with friends of mine who, after being betrayed myself, and it goes something like this, and I suggest that you repeat this to yourself and repeat it to others, especially anyone that you love that feels like they've been betrayed by someone. When the subject of karma comes up and you say karma's a bitch and I hope karma gets them and da-da-da-da-da, here's what you got to say. To all of those who betray us, when we think that we've got a black and white case in court, that we have been betrayed, that the commitment that they made us was not fulfilled, and that there were plenty of ways to not betray us and get what they wanted, yada, yada, yada. Here's what you say. The greatest punishment for people like that is that they get to wake up, and they have to wake up every day being who they are. That's the greatest, beautiful thing that whoever created this universe has instilled in the universe. Meaning, if you think someone's a total jerk, a total asshole, well, that's who they have to wake up being every day of their life. And the rhetorical benefit is that you don't. You get to wake up being a sweet, kind, committed, loyal person. And I want you to thank your lucky stars every day that you wake up that that's who you are. If you made it this far in this video, then you're the kind of person that will continue to improve your integrity. Now, some of you will have betrayed people in your past, and you're not proud of it. I will tell you that, I have definitely disappointed people in my lifetime, and I've made amends with them. Even if I have to reach across the universe to find them, I'll do it. And I'll chat them through, I think I've made amends with everyone I can find so far, but I'll find them on Facebook, find them on LinkedIn or whatever, and I'll say, you know what, dude, I just want to say this happened. I behaved like this, I reacted like that, I said this to you, or I ignored you, or whatever, and I really apologize. I was a total jerk. I was totally wrong. I can tell you right now, 100%, 150,000% of the time, these people said back to me, hey man, it's cool. Thank you so much for saying something. Most of them say, I completely forgot about that. A couple people said, I don't even remember that, but I appreciate you coming back and saying something. You've got that ability. So if you think you have a scarlet letter on you with certain individuals, reach out. Say you're sorry. Be genuine. Do not reach out if you still think they owe you an apology, because you won't get it. The Westworld, episode 9, Anthony Hopkins said what I've been saying forever, which means the writer has been feeling the same way. Never put your trust in a human, because we will always, invariably, let you down, because we're flawed. Well, I don't know about you. As much as we call our alien species human, that's what we are. We're flawed. We're going to let each other down. The real game isn't in keeping score with everybody who's screwed us over and everybody who's hurt our feelings. The real game of maturity is how you deal with that. Let's deal with it in a really cool way. Let's surprise the universe with our tolerance, right? I know you feel me. Appreciate you listening. Hopefully this was useful for those of you who are either going through this feeling right now or you've gone through it. I want you just to take a big, deep breath, close your eyes, exhale, and in that exhale, I want you just to let all of this crusty, negative feelings that have been brought to you through betrayal to just fall off you. Just let it go. Renew yourself. You own who you are, and that's the only person you're ever going to own. And you can make yourself an absolutely amazing person. The fortification at the bottom of the pyramid today is to not be a victim of betrayal. Do your best to not spread betrayal. But if it does happen, let's not infect us and spread like a virus. Let's reject the virus. Let it live in those who wish to manifest it. And let's be immune from it forever through our expansion of our mind, through a deep thought. If you dig the series, please subscribe. If you dig the episode, please give me a thumbs up. I appreciate every single one of you. Looking forward to your comments as always. DeepThoughtsRadio.com, MKUltraRadio.com. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.